Hello and welcome to another video from the only channel you need to not only survive the current apocalypse but actually enjoy it. Today's video is going to be about the two trees that were in the Garden of Eden, and there are a lot of theories about what these trees actually were or what they represented. We're just going to kind of stick to the very basics as it's presented in the Bible. Now, people want to know, what kind of tree that is, and I think a lot of that is because if Adam and Eve were told not to eat from it, then certainly we don't want to eat from it. And if the trees of life, or the tree of life is still here, then probably if we could find that, we would want to eat from that. But these are two separate species of tree, and I think they really were trees. People say that they were just representative of something bigger, and that's probably true, but there were actual trees involved. I've been in religions that have said that there is no way for us to know what kind of fruit was on either of those trees. And I've been in religions that say that at least the tree of knowledge of good and bad was an apple tree. But their way of coming to that conclusion is based on the fact that in Latin, supposedly, I have never studied Latin, but in Latin, supposedly, the word for evil is the same as the word for apple, or very similar. And so that tree would be the tree of evil, the apple tree. But that's not, it shouldn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about. It may somehow be related, but I do believe there are some external stories outside of the Bible about Adam and Eve that talk about this piece of fruit being an apple, and that's another clue that's potentially what it is. But we really want to find an answer inside of the Bible. This is a very old story, 6,000 years ago. It's the oldest story in the Bible. And so anything that we get from it is either going to be accurate if it's in the Bible, or probably inaccurate if it's outside of the Bible. But inside the Bible, it appears as though the tree was a singular tree. It's hard for me to tell using the transcripts of those ancient manuscripts. If I had actual photographs of the manuscripts, I could possibly see if the word is plural or singular, but I think it's pretty easy to see from the context that it's singular for a couple of reasons. We'll explain that right now. The tree is said to be in the middle of the garden, and in reading the entire Bible, it seems to me that that spot is a very, very special spot, and in a future Bible video, I'll explain why that's the case. But it would, from that description, it seems like it's only one tree. Also, in our English Bibles, there is a scripture somewhere in the New Testament that says that Eve's sin was greater than Adam's because Eve was deceived while Adam was not. And that really doesn't make any sense because, grammatically in English it sounds like since Adam freely chose to eat this apple or this fruit, that he hasn't got a sin. Whereas Eve, who was tricked, has a sin. See, that's not what it's talking about. I think the word that's more accurate would be convinced. Eve's sin was greater because she was convinced to eat the apple or the fruit, whereas Adam was not. Now, we know that Adam did eat it, so apparently when he ate the fruit, he had no idea that the fruit was from that tree. Now, the tree was in the center of the garden, so he would have seen it on a regular basis. So if you think, just stop and think, he's eating a piece of fruit, and it looks just like the fruit that was on that tree God said not to eat from, and yet he doesn't recognize it. Why would that be? Well, apparently the Garden of Eden was filled with apple trees, and there was no restrictions to eating from any of those trees. So when Adam got that apple, it's very much probable that he did not even stop to think, did Eve get this from Jehovah's tree? So see, it's not a species that was off limits, it was just that one tree. That's just my reasoning on the thing. Now, I did a series back called Written in Stone. If you haven't watched that, before you finish watching this, you should probably go watch that, because it talks about the relationship between Satan and Eve. If we go just to the Genesis account of this event, we cannot determine what kind of trees these were. But by reading the Bible, we see these trees mentioned over and over again. The apple, as well as the palm. And we'll get to that in a minute. But in this story, it speaks of the sun and the moon. Now, in all mythology, the god of mythology always ends up being the sun god, and his bride always turns out to be a human female mother goddess. And their names are all similar. It's Ishasha, Ishtar, Isis, Ashtoreth, Easter, And it goes all the way into the New Testament, these similar words, and they all relate to Eve. So even though the story is about the sun chasing the moon, it's also about Satan chasing Eve. And instead of around the earth, he's chasing her around a table. Well, that table is actually one of these time things. The oh, I can't think of the name of it, but the sundial. And so as they're going around the sundial, it's describing what's happening. You know, it says that it's, you know, it's winter, and now it's summer, and now it's I see your 60 valiant men. Back of that, in that day, the earth had a 360-day year, and months were 30 days long. That's also part of the Written in Stone series, so you really do need to go look at that. But in the course of the story, the mother goddess, or Eve, talks about two different trees. She talks about the palm trees that she would grab hold of, but she also talks about how her love is, I don't remember exactly how it speaks of it. It's like, I am underneath your apple tree, and I am eating of your apples, and your apples are so sweet, or something of that nature. You can go read the whole Song of Solomon. It shouldn't take you but like an hour to read it at the most. But to me, if it's speaking about Eve and Satan, and she's making several references to palms and to apples, then those are involved. Now, I really believe that the tree of the knowledge of good and bad is the apple. Now, I did another series a while back called The All-Seeing Eye. And in that, I explained that the eye of the illumination, the all-seeing eye that's on the back of our dollar bill, started out as the eye of Ra. Well, there's a reason for that. All satanic gods, all the gods of mythology, are always the gods of illumination, or the gods of knowledge. And the eye of Ra is actually supposedly this eye of illumination that comes from Satan. Well, in the Bible, when it calls that tree the tree of the knowledge of good and bad, what it's actually calling it is the tree of the knowledge, or the illumination of Tov and Ra, because in the Bible, Ra means wicked, and that's Ra is the same as the god Ra, who was Satan, who eventually became the ruler of all of the ancient empires that led right up to ours. And that's why our money has the same symbol that the Greek money had, or the Greek documents had, Roman documents, Assyrian documents, Egyptian documents of Babel, because that all-seeing eye has always been a representation of civilization. So we figured out that the apple is probably the kind of fruit that would have been growing on that tree that God did not want Adam and Eve to eat from. Now, the trees of life, it's different. Once again, we can't tell from the account if these words are singular or plural, but the trees of life are mentioned over and over again in the Bible as plural. And some Bibles leave them singular all the way through, but it's very obvious when you get into the Greek text that they're not singular at all, because it speaks of them as the trees that produce fruit for man 12 months a year, 12 fruits, 12 harvests. So, you know, we just in our own life, we look around, and nature works pretty much similar to the way it always has worked. You know, it's obviously there's been a lot of damage done, but you still have trees that generally will give you 1 or 2, 3, and in some places 4 harvests of fruit in the course of a year. But to produce fruit 12 months a year, you would basically need at least 3 varieties of tree, and I suspect that it's probably 12 varieties of tree, but all of the varieties are varieties of palms. Now we're going to examine from the Bible why that's true. You know, well, this is one of the reasons I don't believe in the Book of Enoch. I think the Book of Enoch says that the trees of life were like a tamarind. And a tamarind, the tree itself, it must be like some kind of a bean tree, you know, or from that family, because the leaves look like that. The fruits actually look like beans. And a palm tree looks nothing like a bean tree. So, you know, and there's a lot of discrepancies. The Book of Enoch has a lot of information in it that is probably accurate, and it was accurate enough that apparently Jude quoted from it, but it wasn't accurate enough for Jehovah to allow it into his Bible. And this is one of the reasons. It's got speculations in there that just are simply not correct. The reason that I say that the palm trees were the trees of life is because in the Bible it gives us description, very, very short description, that the trees of life were in the garden, and then that Adam and Eve sinned, and then the God said, we're going to have to put cherubs out here to keep these people from coming back in here and eating from the trees of life. So they set cherubs all the way around the Garden of Eden to guard it, to make sure that nobody got back in there, because they were protecting the trees of life. So, and look, I'm about to do a series in the future, maybe next year, whatever, about the location of the Garden of Eden and about the book of Revelation. And you'll get a lot more detailed description of this, and I'll be doing that with a script, so I won't be just throwing things out there that I can't back up. But when Moses took the nation of Israel out of Egypt, the first thing they did, one of the first things they did, was to build this big tent called the tabernacle, tent of meeting. And the tent was divided up into several sections. One section called the holy, and then there was a curtain that divided the holy from the most holy. And in that Written in Stone series, I explained that the little ritual that they did in that tent every year represent the restoration of the world, of the universe. So you go in there, and they've got these candlesticks on either side of the wall that represent the restoration of the planets. The priest, dressed as the moon in a ritual designed to remind people that one day the moon would be restored. And he walked through this thing. It's kind of like, if you're a Catholic, they've got the signs of the Stations of the Cross. He would walk through and he would pass each of these planets, and he would get into the most holy, and there would be a Ark of the Covenant, which represented the earth, and above that was a little artificial sun. Don't ask me to explain it. And he would stand in front of it with this vest on that had these transparent stones. Well, that was a representation of the restoration of the world. And all along the walls, and I guess over the Ark of the Covenant, were two cherubs. So they are all out in the middle of the desert, but this wilderness area. They're marching, and every time they move, they disassemble that tent and they carry it and they set it up again. But every time they set it up, there are those cherubs, just the cherubs, nothing else. But when they get to Israel, they go years and years using the tent, but eventually Solomon builds a temple to replace the tent, but he designs the temple to be just like the tent. In other words, they do the exact same rituals. They had the same implements, the same lampstands, the same Ark of the Covenant, the same little artificial sun. There was a cloud that filled the temple, just as the cloud had once filled the tent. Only this time, once they place it on a very holy spot, which I believe is the spot where the tree of life actually was at one time, and the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. And they put the cherubs back in the temple. And they put cherubs all the way around the temple on the walls. So that represented the Garden of Eden. And these cherubs represented the cherubs that guarded the Garden of Eden from anyone getting in and eating of the trees of life. And along with those cherubs, all along the walls, were palm trees. Now, that's not all. Ezekiel saw a vision, and all this stuff, when I get out here and give on these talks, I really want to go back and check everything to make sure I've got this right. But I know that in the vision, and I remember reading about it, he sees these cherubs, and the cherubs have four faces. There's a face here, and a face here, face here, and a face in the back. And part of the description is that these cherubs' eyes, the eye of this cherub's face here, and the eye of this cherub's face here, are concentrating on palm trees. You see, I mean, it's not, look, it doesn't say in the Bible that the tree of the knowledge of good and bad was an apple tree. And it doesn't say that the trees of life were palm trees. But I think that that's a pretty good case. I mean, everything that's done in the Bible is done with a purpose. Every word that's written is written for a purpose. So to speak about these cherubs keeping watch over palm trees, just as the cherubs in the Garden of Eden kept watch over the trees of life, is a pretty good sign that the trees of life were palm trees. Now this information is, you know what, there's a lot of information in the Bible that to me it just is there, and I'm glad it's there and it builds my faith. I don't really know how that information would have benefited us if it were not simply our curiosity. But now that we know what those trees are, and we know that God's word did not forget about those trees, we're better off for it. We have more knowledge, we have more ability to understand what the Bible is about. And when I talk about the earth being restored, that humans are not going to heaven, we're going to be right back in the Garden of Eden, only this time the Garden of Eden is going to be the entire planet. You know, it's not just my emotions telling me that, it's the Bible. Don't want to survive? Don't listen to me.